So glad to have you with me today. Thank you for joining me. Several weeks ago, there was a massive undersea volcanic eruption near the nation of Tonga. Do you remember that? And news warnings quickly spread of a resultant tsunami that had the possibility of reaching our country. Well, shortly after that, we had a pipe burst under our sink, and the water just kind of went everywhere. Did that ever happen to you? And being unfamiliar with all the things in our new house, it took a few minutes for us to get the water turned off, to find out even where to shut the water off. Fortunately, we had great friends who came running and helped us get things cleaned up and fixed up pretty quickly. Though I can tell you it was a panic zone around there for just a little while. In fact, my wife later posted on social media a real simple phrase, "Yikes, we have a tsunami," right? Kind of meant a little bit humorous. Well, a friend of hers from a different part of the country saw her post and deeply concerned wrote back to her and said, "Oh my, are you okay? Please stay safe," thinking it was the Tonga tsunami. We just let her think that it was. Is that bad? I'm just kidding. We didn't really do that, or did we? But think about this. For many, many years, we too have been warned of something coming, haven't we? Worldwide famine, the mother of all wars, Jesus, California falling off into the Pacific Ocean, even aliens, or some other cataclysmic disaster to end the world like, a virus, right? But the question is, have those warnings been heeded? Have they caused people to get prepared, or do most folk just kind of go on with life as usual, or try to? And I'm not making light of any of those any sort of pending doom, but I think it's important to remember that there have always been those kinds of warnings throughout history, some justified, some not. Case in point, the Apostle Peter's words found in 1 Peter 4, verse 7 says, "The end of all things is near." You see, believers in the early church, way back when it all started, expected Jesus to return at any minute. And for sure, they expected Him to return in their lifetime. They literally viewed themselves as standing on the precipice of eternity, which, by the way, is a terrific way to live. I mean, can you imagine the difference that the church could make today in this world for reaching people who are far from God if we really believed that Jesus were coming now in our lifetime? And by the way, it has happened before in the immediate years after Jesus ascended into heaven. The book of Acts describes the early church as turning their world upside down. And one of the primary reasons why is this: their belief in the imminent return of Jesus. So today, let me give you 3 things that all Christ followers should be doing as we prepare for the return of Christ in these last days. They're found in 1 Peter chapter 4, and the first one is in verse 7, where he says this, "The end of all things is near. Therefore, be alert and clear-minded so that you may pray." So the first thing today is this. During the last days, in these times we're living, pray with passion. There's no greater single privilege in the Christian life as prayer. That ability to enter into a conversation with the God who holds all things in the palm of His hand. To be able to go to Him and share our concerns, to love Him and be loved by Him. There is no greater privilege. Would you agree with that? Clear-minded, by the way, means get it clear in your head that when times are urgent, there's no greater activity to involve yourself in than passionate praying. However, that being said, prayer's not always that glamorous, is it? It's not always that easy, that's for sure. In fact, Peter knew that all too well. Do you remember what happened just prior to Jesus being arrested? He went into the Garden of Gethsemane and began to pray. And He took 3 disciples with Him. One of them was Peter. And Jesus went out and prayed, and he came back to the men, and he had told them, you stay here and watch and pray. I'm going over here and praying. He prayed for a while. They came back, and all three of them, including Peter, were sound asleep. And he woke them up and said, could you not just stay awake and pray for an hour? And so he left again to go pray. The disciples fell asleep. 3 times this happened, and they fell asleep. So guess what? If the disciples, here's where I'm going with this. If the disciples had trouble on occasion with praying, I mean, those people that were with Jesus every day, if they had trouble with prayer, so will we from time to time. That's why Peter, who was one of those disciples, writes this admonition to be clear-minded, to give our full attention to our praying. Which really begs a question for us, and that is, how is our prayer life today? How is your prayer life today? If Jesus were to return tonight, will you be pleased to show Him your prayer life? Or will you be a little bit nervous of that? I'll be honest and tell you I might be a little bit nervous of that today. And by the way, praying with a clear and compassionate mind also connotes a seriousness. We are to be serious about our prayer life. Like the cute little story about the little boy whose mom was pregnant. And so the parents decided they would include him in the pregnancy by asking him to pray about having a new baby brother or a new baby sister. And he did. He got excited about that. He began praying, at least for a while. But when nothing happened and Mom didn't bring home a baby right away, he eventually, just like a little kid, he just eventually lost interest. Well, Mom gave birth to triplets. Yeah. And when she brought those 3 babies home and showed Big Brother, they said to him, "This is God's answer to your prayers. Aren't you glad you prayed?" And the little boy responded, "I sure am, but aren't you glad I stopped praying when I did?" Get it? Funny story. So, pray with passion, like that little boy should have prayed. Pray with passion. And then secondly, love without limits, especially in these times we are living today. In verse 8 it says this, "Above all, love each other deeply, because love covers a multitude of sins." Deeply means fervently. It means love intensely, stretched out with enthusiasm kind of love. It's the idea of athletes' muscles in competition, or a horse's neck as it strains to win at the Kentucky Derby. In other words, Peter is saying, love one another with intensity and passion and fervor, stretched out and giving it all you have when you love someone else. In fact, that's most likely what Peter had in mind when he said in this verse that love covers a multitude of sins. Cover does not mean condone. It means when another sins and fails God, I'm there for them, to help them, to pick them up, even to protect them as they make their way back to God. Are you familiar with that phrase, "Hey, I got you covered"? That's what this means. That I am covering, that I am protecting, refusing to needlessly expose or exploit the person who blows it in this life. And actually, this verse is probably a reference to something that happened back in Genesis 9 with Noah. Do you remember his story? Noah was a righteous man who obeyed God when God told him to come and build a large boat. God said there's going to be 40 days and nights of rain, and then there's going to be a flood. And Noah was faithful to that. Even though he had never seen it rain, even though he had no clue what a flood was, and he certainly didn't know what a boat was. But he was faithful. And because of his faith and because of his obedience, Noah and his family were saved from the flood. But do you remember what happened to Noah just after the flood? Noah planted a grape vineyard and got into the wine-making business. His problem was that one day he drank too much of his own wine, and he got so drunk that he stripped off all of his clothes. And for a man of his stature and in his position, this was a huge, huge no-no. Now, when his grown sons heard about what happened, they could have done anything. They could have laughed at him. They could have made fun of him. If they were alive today, they'd probably taken pictures and posted them on social media. They could have put him to shame like that, but they refused to do that. Instead, because of their steadfast love for their father, two of the sons slipped into his tent where he had passed out, and they literally covered his nakedness. Out of loving respect, they even walked backward into the tent so they wouldn't see his nakedness, and they placed his cloak over him to cover him. Now, why did they do all that? Quite simply, because they loved him. Unconditionally and without limits, they loved their father. And that's what Peter means here when he says, above all, love each other deeply, because love covers a multitude of sins. So Peter asks, do you want to be ready and prepared when Jesus returns? Pray with passion. Love people without limits. And last, give with gladness. Verse 9 says, offer hospitality. Give hospitality to one another without grumbling. Now, hospitality here is an interesting word. It means friendship to strangers. In our present day, we would simply say those that we don't really know, those we don't know very well. We're to show hospitality toward. And by the way, this is different than entertaining, because while entertaining guests in your home, for instance, is good, that's not what Peter's talking about here by hospitality. Entertaining involves having good friends in your life and in your home, people that you know you'll enjoy. Hospitality, on the other hand, is inviting those you may not know well or even at all into your life and maybe into your home in order to get to know them. And hospitality is not so easy for a lot of us, is it? I mean, it's easier to go our own way of just kind of being comfortable, hiding out, or just doing our own thing with our own family in our own houses. One person said it's like gravity. Gravity is this powerful force that pulls everything toward the center of the planet, right? It's not all bad, because gravity is what keeps us glued to the ground. It keeps us from flying off into space. But there are other times when to live comfortably, we have to defy gravity, even though it takes a little effort to do so. For instance, whenever you fly in an airplane, you are defying gravity, since it requires the effort of thrust and the lift of the wings. But through that effort, gravity is overcome. So hospitality is like flying. When we express hospitality to those we don't know so well, we're overcoming not the law of gravity, but we're overcoming the law of fear and maybe even selfishness. And it's not always easy or natural sometimes, but it is so like God. So think for a moment. Other than family, who are the people you've spent your time with the past, 6 months or so? Would you say it's the same old? The same friends? The same family? Yeah, I'd have to say the same thing about me for the most part. And I'm not saying that's bad. It's not. In fact, it's good. It's just not hospitality. And think of the blessings from God associated with hospitality. In Genesis 18, there's an incredible story of hospitality concerning Abraham. One day, 3 strangers showed up on his property, and he had no clue who they were. They were angels that looked like ordinary men, although Abraham didn't realize that until later. So he welcomed them. He washed their feet, as was the custom, and he fed them. He showed them genuine hospitality. But he also provided a great lesson for us today, and that is this. If you never open your life to strangers, and I'm talking to the people you don't know really well, if you never open your life to them in any way, you may miss one of the greatest opportunities and blessings of your life. Because Hebrews 13 says, do not forget to entertain strangers, for by so doing you may be entertaining angels without even knowing it. Now there's something to think about, yes? In 1959, the Queen of England was scheduled to make an historic visit to the United States. Among her stops was the city of Chicago, where she was to stay at the famous Drake Hotel. Elaborate preparations were made for her visit. The waterfront was readied for docking her yacht. Litter baskets were all freshly painted. A red carpet was rolled out. When they contacted the Drake Hotel to see how their preparations were coming, the manager curtly explained to the committee, "We are making no special plans for the Queen, for our rooms are always ready for royalty." Wow. What an advertisement that was for the Drake Hotel, right? So Peter is saying, the King of Kings is coming soon. Pray like you've never prayed. Love people like crazy. Show genuine hospitality to everyone you meet. Let's get ready to meet the Lord of glory face to face. Amen? Amen. Thank you for joining me again. Hopefully, God willing, we'll see you this next week and we'll do it all again. God bless you. Have a great week. Goodbye.